Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We ring this bell 3 times. The first is to call us into relationship with those to whom we owe a debt, our forebearers who preceded us here and once occupied this land most of us now call home. The second calls us into relationship with ourselves and one another, that we learn to grow in wisdom and compassion and share it generously. And the third calls us into relationship with our children's children out to the 7th generation, helping us to realize that what we do now will be felt by those who come after us.
Good morning. I'm Paul K. Davis. I'll be your worship associate this morning, and Drew Wilson is worship leader, as Reverend Greg has a Sunday off. I fantasize that most of the people who know me think of me as well-adjusted and free from significant personal problems. I have made no definite effort to find out if this is what people really think of me, though my wife has shared with me much of her assessment of my characteristics. My own understanding of myself, which of course is not necessarily accurate, is somewhat fuller. For instance, I have gone through significant periods of chronic, though not severe, depression. The first was after separation and divorce from my first wife. Another was associated with a deterioration of my relationship with my present wife. I have concluded that I am much more dependent on my life partner relationship than I would ever have predicted when I was growing up. As for external appearances, I covered those periods with intense activity in organizations, first political and then theatrical. I have also gone through periods of considerable stress and anxiety. The most notable of these was when I was elected president of my union local and was promptly thrown into dealing with rejection of election results by those who lost. Yes. When these issues were resolved, many praised me for having maintained my cool in the situation and thanked me for piloting the organization through the turbulence. Inside me, however, I had sleepless nights, a general feeling of tension in my body, especially my head, and inability to focus on other aspects of my life. I have previously talked to you about the blessing my wife was, insisting I take a weekend vacation to Yosemite away from the problem. I also realized I should be evaluated by a medical professional. I went to the clinic at my work site, and they sent me home with instruction to have my regular doctor evaluate my blood pressure. He did so and promptly put me on medication. After further evaluation, that medication was supplemented. I later found out that if my blood pressure had been just 1 point higher, I would have been sent directly to the hospital rather than home. I have found that my blood pressure medications also affect my mood, or perhaps it's the lower blood pressure itself. We're anxious about the aesthetics presently. Thank you, Don. I have found that my blood pressure medications also affect my mood, or perhaps it's the lower blood pressure itself. I am less anxious and more content now. I bless my work clinic and my general practitioner for rescuing me. I have known several people on medication for psychiatric reasons. I was actually led to this congregation by one, namely Sarah Rahman. From them, I learned the dangers of suddenly stopping a medication. Nevertheless, when we went into seclusion because of COVID and my blood pressure prescriptions expired, I avoided going in for the examination necessary to renew them. I did not notice any immediate drastic problems, which was misleading. Fortunately, when I went to my dentist for some essential work, they refused after measuring my blood pressure. This woke me up again, and I went back to my doctor for a prescription update. I hope my story imparts two lessons. First, if there is an indication you need medical or psychiatric help, absolutely do seek it out. Second, when you see people around you achieving much in their life, realize that it may depend on the support they have received from family, from associates, and from medicine. So please support people, whether they appear to need immediate support or not. Everyone does. So please join with me in worship as I anxiously await words of wisdom in further exploration of mental balance and maintenance of ourselves psychologically and emotionally.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning online to those of you here and online. It is good to see each and every one of you here this morning. Welcome to Mission Peak Unitarian Universalist Congregation. I'm Gail Tupper, and I'm a member of our Board of Trustees. Our Unitarian Universalism is a radically inclusive, non-doctrinal, non-dogmatic, open-minded, and open-hearted faith. We are people who are all coming at truth from different paths. We gather together across different identities, experiences, and beliefs to affirm and promote the inherent worth of every person. Together, we see our job is to love the hate out of this world, heal the hurt in ourselves and one another. And we want to be part of the change we'd like to see in the world. Remember, you can use chat either in Zoom or in our book near the welcome table to share joys and concerns, brief notes of your personal milestones of importance that will be read aloud later in the service. If you're here for the first time, we extend a special welcome. We've been reaching out and asking people to bring their friends because we think the world, especially now, needs some friendly places to gather and find encouragement and hope. We do have social hour after the service where we get to visit with one another in breakout rooms or here on the patio. Our worship host will give you more information about the Zoom breakout rooms right after the service. In the meantime, I will shortly put a link to our weekly newsletter in the Zoom chat so you can see upcoming events. We encourage you to join anything that speaks to you or ask us more about these events. We also put our welcome email, welcome@mpuuc.org, so you can request that we send a newsletter or other information. There are a few things we'd especially like to call your attention to. In-person attendees should be masked inside and outside of Cole Hall during the service. Since even vaccinated people can spread the disease to others, we strongly encourage those in contact with children and unvaccinated or immunocompromised adults to attend the services outside or via Zoom. We allow Sunday service participants to be unmasked while speaking. More information is on the bulletin board to your left and in This Week on the Peak. If you haven't already, please silence your electronic devices. If you hear or see something in this morning's service that inspires you or makes you laugh or brings you hope, Please share it on your social media or tell a friend. We want to start a new wave of love and justice with every gathering. Thank you all for joining us today.
Please join me in lighting our chalice, reciting the words that are in your order of service or will appear on the screen as we join with all Unitarian Universalists in lighting a chalice. We light this chalice to remind ourselves to treat all people kindly because we are all one family, to take good care of the earth because it is our home, to live lives full of goodness and love because that is how we will become the best people we can be.
Has someone ever dared you, or even double dared you, to do something? I'll wager that has happened to all of you multiple times, especially when you were young. Sometimes the action is a dangerous one or illegal, and you are well advised not to take the dare. Other times, it just seems dangerous or scary, but it is really quite safe. And the person is just encouraging you to do it, or is trying to show how much braver they are than you. Today's story, of which I have only included the scariest parts, is called Dare You Go Under the Sea. and is written by Sarah Hewitson and illustrated by Kathy Shuttleworth. Now, why might a sea be scary? Let's see. I dare you to dive into this swirly, whirly sea. Because in this sea, there are lots of scary-looking sharks. Now, let's stop and consider why else we might not want to dive into this sea. For one thing, we might not know how to swim. And even if we do, if we want to stay under more than a few seconds, we need a diving gear with an air supply. Finally, even if we have all that, if it is stormy and the currents might be so strong they'd sweep us out to the deep ocean where we'd never be found again, and that would not be good for us either. But what other scary things might be under the sea? Oh, look, there's an old rusty sunken ship, and in this sunken ship, oh no, there's a rotten, forgotten treasure chest. What could be in it? Treasure? A lurking electric eel to shock you? Some other scary thing? And I dare you to open this chest, because in it you will find a very huggable octopus. Oh well, not so scary after all. And that's what life's all about, trying to decide if things are really scary or you just think they're scary. And are they really dangerous or you just think they're dangerous? And should you do them or should you not? Not an easy decision quite often. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the service. Good morning again. So, and as Paul said, I am your worship associate, Drew Wilson. Now, it's my pleasure to announce that we take up a collection on Sundays for the simple reason that our purpose in gathering is for more than ourselves. We want to make sure that the ministries that we need, the ones that infuse worth and dignity into our children, our youth, our programs of learning and leadership, and our ministries of anti-oppression and our work in the larger world are in place to meet the needs of others. We hope you will make a contribution toward these worthy causes by mailing your check to Mission Peak UU congregation at the address on the screen. You can also use the bill pay option in your online banking or drop your check in the Mission Peak mail slot, or pay online with a credit or debit card. Thank you for supporting and sustaining the efforts of our members, friends, and staff. Your contributions help reduce the anxiety of those who would like to see Mission Peak continue to be a thriving UU congregation in Fremont and make loving learning and leadership more possible. Okay, now it's time for joys and concerns. One of the things that allows us to find hope and meaning, especially in the hard times, is the love and support we show each other. If you have a joy or concern that by sharing with this caring community might bring the encouragement or resilience you are needing, please write it briefly now in the chat. If you are here in person and would like to place a stone for joy or concern, you may do so while the music plays. If your need is personal, you can also send an email to our minister for a follow-up conversation. finally, if Paul can free up one hand, one last stone for the hopes and hurts still too tender to escape our hearts. May, for the sake of love, we keep our doors, our hearts, our minds, and our arms open. The reading today is from one of many stories about living with anxiety disorder, which can be found on the Anxiety and Depression Association of America's website. I am only reading excerpts because of its length. This particular story is by Jason Jepson. It's entitled "The Dark Cloud Overhead." When I was in my middle teen years, my dad once remarked that I seemed to have a dark cloud hanging over my head. He did not say those words to be hurtful. They were just an observation that he made on a particular day. Although that comment was made over 25 years ago, I still remember his words because they describe my adolescence very well. I was growing up in a typical household during the 1980s. My parents were educators, and they were very much involved in my life. However, I look back on those days and I conclude that I was functionally depressed. There may have been no outward signs that I was suffering mentally, but I was barely holding my head above water. In those days, the music that my friends and I listened to was sung by entertainers whose lyrics often reflected their own suicidal thoughts. They almost made it trendy or cool to be down on life. In my howling late teens, it almost seemed trendy to be down or even depressed. Getting help like therapy or medication was not popular. So skipping ahead a bit, I had depression for years and used alcohol and cigarettes for therapy. I had some success and some failures in college before I joined the Army. It was my first duty station that I finally was diagnosed with a severe mental illness, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type. I now take an antidepressant that has made all the difference. I am able to share my thoughts and how I feel with my friends and doctors at the Veterans Hospital. Life has been a roller coaster since that diagnosis, but I am happy to report that I am now living my best life. The dark cloud has cleared away, and I am now living a life of recovery. I learn more every day about managing my symptoms, and I use my experience to advocate for others who might be experiencing mental illness. It is still hard for some people to ask for help and to get the help they need. For those who are able to get help, therapy is even available by phone. I write first-person accounts of living with mental illness so that others will not feel alone. Also, there are support groups on social networks. I personally have gotten help from these sources. I am on the right medication and have a perfect support group. I even enjoy sharing my story, and I hope this story will help someone to get help because help is out there. ADAA has awesome accounts of people with similar stories that I have. They help to feel less alone.
tears are in your eyes, I'll dry them all. I'm on your side. Oh, when times get rough and friends just can't be found, like a bridge over troubled waters, I will lay me down. Like a bridge over troubled waters, I will lay me down. When you're down and out, when you're on the street, when evening falls so hard, I will comfort you. I'll take your part. Oh, when time is lost, and failures all around, like a bridge over troubled waters, I will lay me down. Like a bridge over troubled waters, I will lay me sail on, sail on wine. Your time has come to shine. All your dreams are on their way. See how they shine. If you need a friend, I'm sailing right behind. Like a bridge over troubled waters, I will ease your mind. Like a bridge over troubled waters, I will ease your mind. Yeah.
Yes, we all need bridges over troubled waters. So, that's in fact kind of the topic of my message, my struggles with anxiety. Some years ago, as part of a service on depression led by Barbara Myers, I gave a reflection on my own struggles with anxiety and depression, and how a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, also known as an SSRI, has helped me. For this message, I'm going to dive deeper into my time in Massachusetts and how my UU church and Janet, my late wife, helped me. I have long been a worrywart. I could spend days worrying about a problem, unable to concentrate on much else, let alone sleep or other mundane things. I would avoid situations that made me the least bit uncomfortable. I would procrastinate, afraid to deal with an issue. But everyone in my family tended to worry a lot, so I thought it was normal. Now, being a worrier isn't all bad. It can save you from situations that could end up harming you, such as diving into a rough, swirly, dangerous sea. But excessively focusing on all the ways things might go wrong can also keep you from taking actions that would be good for you. It is all a matter of degree. Too little worrying can get you in serious trouble, but too much can make you so cautious that you get in a different kind of trouble. And when it goes beyond just being cautious, it becomes anxiety. In my freshman year, the stress of being away from home, attending an academic environment much more rigorous than my high school, and college life in general produced a great amount of anxiety. My dorm floor's resident assistant convinced me to visit the college counseling service. Now, when I went, I expected a suit and tie wearing psychologist, but this was the early 70s. And I was confronted with a person sitting cross-legged on the floor in love beads and tie-dye. He suggested I try meditating and gave me a few simple techniques. I was a bit surprised by the whole thing, but decided to give meditation a try. The first month was very hard, but then it got easier, and by the second month, I was noticing a real improvement in my mood. Unfortunately, I did not carry the practice through that summer, and have never really gotten back into it. Maybe someday. It's the first month that's the hardest. My chronic worrying didn't always stop me. While I have to overcome significant fears and doubts, I did have to overcome significant fears and doubts. 4 years after getting my master's degree, I went back to the university and got a PhD. And in a strange new, to me, place known as Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, so it's quite a change of environment. I even joined a Unitarian Universalist singles group where I met my future wife, Janet. But after I graduated with a computer engineering degree, I took a job with a startup company where I was chief architect on a project to build a product based on my PhD thesis. What could be better? However, creating a computer design and overseeing an actual project are two different things, I quickly discovered. Being the architect of a project requires balancing competing demands from the engineers, management, and funding sources. It means dealing with a lot of conflicting demands, many of them only partly technical. And a side effect of my anxiety was an inability to handle conflict. I would basically have what I call a micro-panic attack, which would freeze my brain and prevent me from effectively countering the arguments, even though once I got out of the situation, I knew exactly what I should have said. I would basically have, anyway. Thus, I avoided conflict and just agreed to things, hoping it would still work out. This is not a recipe for success. Eventually, as it became clear things were not going well, I became very depressed. Janet, who had pretty serious focal epilepsy at the time, later improved with brain surgery, also saw a psychologist to cope with her own depression related to the epilepsy. Since she couldn't drive, I took her into Boston for her sessions. Her psychologist suggested I see a therapist he knew closer to Framingham, after he noticed how depressed I looked. where Janet and I lived, and I eventually arranged to meet him. In hindsight, he was not the right therapist for me. And after we'd exhausted the 10 sessions my insurance would cover, he declared me cured, although I really had made very little progress. Unfortunately, this made me even more reluctant to seek help. After all, how would I be able to find a therapist I could work with? What if the next one was just as bad or even worse? I got more and more depressed, convinced there was no way out, and even wondered briefly now and then if living was worth it. I felt that I was destined to be a failure in my life and career. So what saved me? Well, several things. Janet and I belonged to the Framingham UU Church, and were both in the choir and active in other activities, including a monthly coffee house run by members of the choir. This provided a weekly escape and a place where I was succeeding. But more importantly, we both liked and respected our minister. Now, Janet kept encouraging, then nagging me, and finally resorting to a threat of divorce to get me to seek professional help, and tempered that with the suggestion that perhaps we could have a chat with the minister, which is a lot easier to imagine for me. Even that took a while to agree to, but eventually she and I had a half-hour visit with him. He listened sympathetically as I described some of my troubles. He then said, "Well, Drew, it may surprise you to know that I don't provide counseling myself, but I do think you need it." He then suggested a therapist in a nearby town who also happened to be UU and suggested I call her. Well, it took a few more weeks and a bit more pestering from Janet, but eventually I called. I have to really thank Janet for all the pestering. It was so wonderful. The therapist had me in for an evaluation session where she asked all sorts of questions. Usually, a long pause would ensue until I could manage a brief answer. I was wondering if I was going anywhere, but of course, that alone told her volumes about how depressed I was. So we arranged for me to come once a week for, if I remember correctly, 50-minute sessions. Fortunately, my new insurance covered up to 20 visits, and by the time those ran out, we could both see that I was making real progress and that I still needed more sessions. So I continued with her, paying out of pocket. In hindsight, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. Eventually, I was in therapy for about 1.25 years. As I recovered, I got the courage to resume looking for another job. Friends who had left the company I was working for told me it was much better elsewhere, but I was afraid to take a chance on that being true. I did try a few times, but never followed through. In addition to all that, that year we also had an especially cold and snowy winter, and I realized that Massachusetts winters were too long and dark and therefore contributed to my depression. Now, former coworkers suggested I talk to a recruiter that he had used to find his new job, and with my newfound courage from therapy, I was able to call the recruiter. The recruiter was actually very good and helped me overcome my fear that I wasn't any good and wouldn't get hired. He sent me to a couple of local companies, and then I mentioned that I really wanted to move to California. The next week, he found a company in Fremont looking for someone with my skills. I had 2 rounds of interviews that went great, and I landed and took the job. Fortunately, Janet and I had visited San Francisco somewhat earlier when I attended a conference there, and so we both knew we would like it. So Janet and I happily moved to Fremont. And a whole other top sermon can be about my involvement with Mission Peak, but we're going to skip that today. My therapist was concerned that we really needed another few months of sessions, and that it might be that I needed more than just psychological therapy. However, we accelerated the schedule a bit, and she told me to be sure to find a therapist in California if I had a relapse. So, moved to California, several different jobs. At one point I ended up at Sun Microsystems, and there I did become very anxious and somewhat depressed again because of the stress of the particular project I was working on at Sun. A therapist I was recommended, I saw a therapist I was recommended to through their employee assistance program, and she helped me recover from that. But it's still left the lingering question, why do I worry so much? In particular, why do even relatively little things cause me to fret about them and lose sleep for days at a time? So around 15 to 20 years ago, I began to realize that no one in Janet's family worried about things the way I did. And then I remembered a remark from my Massachusetts therapist about possibly needing something more. I mentioned my anxiety to my Kaiser doctor, and he referred me to a Kaiser psychologist. She gave me an anxiety evaluation, which indicated that I had generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, and suggested that I try Prozac, generically known as Fluoxetine, which my doctor then prescribed. Within a few days, I could feel the dark cloud, similar to what was described in our reading, begin to lift. There are many different types of anxiety with different causes and different specific symptoms. There are 11 anxiety disorders listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, DSM-5, including my specific one. According to the website of the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, the ADAA, generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, is characterized by persistent and excessive worry about a number of different things. People with GAD may anticipate disaster and may be overly concerned about money, health, family, work, or other issues. Check, 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 check. Individuals with GAD find it difficult to control their worry. They may worry more than seems warranted about actual events, or may expect the worst even when there is no apparent reason for concern. The website lists typical symptoms as feeling nervous, irritable, or on edge, having a sense of impending danger, panic, or doom, having an increased heart rate, breathing rapidly, hyperventilation, sweating and or trembling, feeling weak or tired, difficulty concentrating, having trouble sleeping, experiencing gastrointestinal problems. Unfortunately, I checked most of those boxes anyway, or did. Of course, these symptoms can be caused by many other factors, so you need an evaluation such as I had to see if you have actual GAD, but I certainly used to experience a lot of these. It is awful nice not to have them anymore. The fact that fluoxetine works so well for me indicates that I have lower than normal serotonin in my brain. Specifically, fluoxetine is one of several selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, which help increase the levels of serotonin in the brain by reducing the speed with which the neuron that releases the serotonin reabsorbs it, allowing some of it to travel to adjacent neurons. As serotonin is a key communication chemical affecting mood, low levels create the kind of anxiety that I experienced. Rapid serotonin reuptake isn't the only cause of GAD. Last week, Reverend Greg talked about post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD for short, which can include quite excessive anxiety, extreme anxiety, or as a symptom. In an article from the verywellmind.com website, Will Meek, PhD, discusses potential factors. There is no single cause of generalized anxiety disorder that has been identified. Evidence has shown that multiple factors are usually at play influencing the development of GAD. Some of the common factors include things like genetic predisposition, brain chemistry, family background, social influence, and life experiences. In my case, the fact that an SSRI helps so much is a very strong indicator of brain chemistry being a root cause. Since, as I mentioned at the beginning, my whole family seemed to suffer with it, and I know SSRIs help my sister as well as me, it would appear to run in my family, and thus I inherited it, which is a genetic cause. Also, the article notes elsewhere that the family background category includes having parents model anxious behavior. And since my parents appeared to have GAD as well, I can tell in hindsight, they were modeling it quite a bit for me. Unintentionally, but they were. So that is also a factor. Finally, job stress clearly makes it worse. So when Reverend Greg gave his message on PTSD and the extreme anxiety it can cause, he listed 4 general areas that can help. The first was friends, family, and community, like Mission Peak. The second was practices like meditation. The third was therapy from a mental health professional, and the fourth was medication. As you can see from my story, I've tried all of them at one time or another. Clearly family, in particular Janet and now Shauna, friends in my UU community have been a great help and continue to help today. Meditation does not work. For example, you guys are such a great audience. I don't have to be so anxious about giving you a sermon. Meditation does work for me when I do it. Therapy has also had great, though not lasting, results. Finally, of course, SSRIs work well for me because they address an underlying brain chemistry cause. But any of these solutions by them in isolation would not have as great effect as they do all together. I value the Carey community here at Mission Peak. I've corrected some of my ingrained behaviors wired in from my pre-SSRI experiences through the therapy, and I may still try to get into some form of meditation again. I suppose long walks are a kind of walking meditation, and they certainly calm me down, too. Because of all the years I suffered with GAD, I have a lot of anxiety responses still wired into me. In particular, even with therapy, I'm still very conflict avoidant. I discussed above how my micro-panic attacks made properly addressing conflict very difficult. But even though I don't have those attacks as much since taking the SSRI, the response is still rather wired in, making it hard, though not nearly impossible no longer nearly impossible as it used to be, to deal with conflict. I'm sure I am not the only one, so please have patience with those of us who try, but don't always succeed in dealing with conflict constructively. And of course, if you do worry a lot, get evaluated by a professional. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, besides the ADAA website, there's also the National Association for Mental Illness, which a number of people in this congregation belong to, which has great resources on all types of mental illness, including anxiety and depression. Not only would I be remiss, but I'd be roundly criticized by some of our members, like Barbara. But anyway, yes, it's a good site too, and I did use it, but I didn't end up quoting from it. I can tell you that my life is much, much rosier with my generalized anxiety disorder under control. Blessed be.
will find true harmony. Seek the essence, hold the essence, let the essence carry you. Let me flower and be flower, watch me flower carry you. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony.
Please join me as we recite in unison our chalicing extinguishing words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
As Virginia Woolf once said, no need to hurry, no need to sparkle, no need to be anybody but oneself. And I'll add, a pie doesn't hurt either. Go in peace, know that deep down you do sparkle, and return again in love. May it be so. Amen.